yeah, no, it is, yeah, you're right, it is different.
Oh,
Okay.
well, the first one is,
First one's standard.
yeah, Levy, I think is where, yeah.
Well, I'd be okay doing,
See
I'd be okay
Where
doing
does Levy go till?
till verse 19, according to this.
Oh, so that's, okay, so I think the law goes according to the Eitz Chaim.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think the Tikkun, I think it combines Levi, and it goes all the way to cut note the Or Vayal B'Shem,
Oh, wow.
which is marked here Revi'i, and so they split. So so then Shlishi goes from 20 through,
Chapter 3, verse 21.
which is cut note the Kosnos Vayal B'Shem. Yeah, yeah, okay, and then Revi'i. Yeah, Revi'i's long. To 18, chapter 4. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's right, okay. And then Hamishi is, yeah, short,
Yeah.
till,
Yeah, chapter 4, 19, verse through
okay, 26. Then
Yeah.
the next one is 27, Shishi. I think that was another, does that go to 24?
You know, yeah, it does, it does. Yeah.
Oh, so then it's, okay. 25.
So I
Through 8,
I
okay.
could do 5, 6, 7 if you need.
Okay. All right, okay,
That's okay?
yeah.
All right,
Okay.
I'll do 5, 6, 7.
Okay,
No problem.
yeah, I think I'll take the Luach home, because, yeah. It's divided differently in the Tikkun, yeah. Okay,
I'm also, tomorrow, I'm in, with the, hopefully, morning, and then stuff in the morning, and, to the early afternoon. And then, I'm pretty sure the early afternoon, I'm gonna drive to Pittsburgh,
oh, you're gonna, yeah,
and see the Cubs.
oh, wow.
So it's the last,
Oh, yeah, this is the last week.
last week of the season, so,
Oh, so you're gonna stay?
let's drive back.
Oh, God, you're, woo. Well, it's only 4, is it
3.5 hours.
3.5?
It won't be hard to go.
So as far as Minyan in the evening,
Many in the evening,
You probably-
I
probably
mean,
do.
I might call in
what is the game, 7?
6:30.
Oh, 6:30.
They're the two worst teams of the division. I mean, there'll be Cubs fans there because there always are, but
Hmm.
it's not gonna be a huge crowd.
Yeah. Oh, so do you have there's probably no problem getting a ticket. Yeah.
At least, well, what I always do, I always get the cheapest ticket,
Oh,
that I can get. So one of the upper deck ones, and
Oh.
then I usually do standing room.
standing,
So I
oh.
usually basically just sort of stand in the,
Oh.
like the lowest concourse and keep score there, and then at a certain point, usually after about the third inning, the usher will let us kind of come.
Oh, you keep score?
I always keep score.
Oh, wow.
Or at least I can. Yeah. All right, so what we'll do is, all right, so Dal's about like 7:45 or so.
So then we can start about,
We'll start minutes at 7,
Yeah.
3 minutes, then, do quick minute, then I'll basically.
so then Marav can start,
7:35?
yeah.
Okay. Easy enough.
I know we spoke briefly, was it before Yom to start thinking of or doing some recruiting or whatever about Minyan
Yes.
daily.
Yeah, I mean, I want to do something where it's pretty streamlined, where,
I don't know if we should attack it aggressively or try. Now, I've been basically Thursdays been sort of good. I've been, since it's Torah reading, and you're not here on Monday, so I was Thursdays. In fact, Joe Sturman, said to me this morning, I wasn't even thinking with the holidays and Simchat Torah, so I don't think we'll have I'm not going to start making calls now for a Minyan. So, because Thursday I was trying to get, since it's Torah reading day, Minyans, so more or less so that's sort of a day where we've been pretty successful. So I don't know if how we should try this a couple of days at a time, or try to do it every single day, or start with, I don't know, a couple of days at a time and increase, I don't know, maybe that's wrong. Try to just get one every day, or
I think I'd like to try. I mean, even if we're unsuccessful for a number of days, at least hopefully the message gets out that we want to get things out there to people. And, you know, if we're only getting, you know, let's say we get to like 5 to 6 on Wednesday, and then we get to 7 or 8 on a Friday, whatever it is, it's like, okay, we have a little bit more to go on both of those days, and we'll have it.
See now, and there were certain days where there were yurt sites,
Right.
so people like Larry Levin was really, who else was Larry, and Joe Chef? Larry and Joe Chef, they were like Tuesdays, for one reason, I don't know, one reason or another, they volunteered to come Tuesdays and Fridays all the time. So Larry would shift, like Thursdays, I said, can you come Thursday? So he would not come, whatever, on Fridays, and he would do Thursday. So I guess he's flexible in changing days. But I mean, normally it worked out for them to whatever they came Tuesdays and Fridays. So they can always go back to that. Or
sort of say, like, just ask them to take, you know, have a Minyan day or 2 days or something like that. I think that's probably that works well.
And I don't know, again, with the COVID, people, I don't know if they will be reluctant to come back. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's another factor.
I think you got to try.
Yeah.
Think,
Oh, yeah.
You got to try, and then you know, and then at a certain point, you know, we'll see, you know, are people coming back or not? I mean, at least we'll have data. So
Yeah.
Go back on.
Now, I told the Janet had some kind of a system, I don't know, I guess she kept like days or had written down like people who came, and then she had an extra list of those, you know, if you need, that you can call them like a day before or whatever they, you know, or even the night before, you know, you're going to be shorter, there's a lot of people who come, maybe, I think she had a list of people who, if you need them, will come. Yeah, so.
Okay. You ready? Chag Sameach once again. We will, while it is still in the afternoon, we will recite the afternoon service, page 226 in our Chumashim, in our Seder Shalom Sederim, page 226.
Ashrei Ashrei Betecha Od Yalelucha Selo.
תהילת אדוני ידבר פי, ויברך כבוסו שם קדשו לעולם ועד, ואנחנו נברך יה, מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה. ויפתחו בך יודעי שמך, כי לא עזבת דורשך אדוני, אדוני חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיל תורה וידיר.
We recite on page 241A, we'll have our leader recite the first page of the Amidah, 242A, and then 244 and 246 will be individual. Make sure to include proper passages for Simchat Torah.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei avoteinu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak ve'Elohei Yaakov, Ha'el hagadol hagibor v'hanora, El Elyon, Gomel chasodim tovim, ve'konei hakol, v'zocher chasdei avot, u'mevi go'el livnei v'neihem, l'man shemo b'yahava, Melech Ozer u'Moshe u'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, atah gibor li'olam Adonai, Mechayei metim atah rab lehoshia, Mashiv haruach morir hagashem, Mechalkel chayim bechesed, Mechayei metim berachamim rabim, Somech noflim v'rofei cholim, U'matir asurim, U'mekayem emunato lishenei afar. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומידו מלך, מלך מימית ומחיה ומצמיח ישועה, ונאמן אתה להחיות מתים, ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהלוך סלע, ברוך אתה אדוני האל הקדוש.
Please rise for Aleinu, page 248.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגור עלינו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא. ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
In lieu of a minyan, we still remember our loved ones and praise God's name. Al hakol yikadal v'yikadash v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yinaseh shmo shel melech malchei hamalachim hakadosh baruch hu ba'olamot shebara ha'olam hazeh v'ha'olam haba. Rock of eternity, master of all creatures, God of all souls, who sits in the expanses of heaven, your holiness upon the divine throne, may your name be sanctified within us, Adonai our God, and in the eyes of all who have lived. As it is written, the glory of Adonai will be revealed, and all flesh together will see that the mouth of Adonai has spoken. Oseh shalom b'mirmav hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu, v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. You may be seated. So, as the situation was last Wednesday, we have a bit of time between this point when we said Mincha and then when we can start Mariv at the appropriate time so that we're saying Havdalah when it's truly dark and when Yontif is truly over. So we're going to start Mariv at about 7:35, so that gives us about 25 or so minutes to play around with. So if you want to pause or minimize the live stream for the 25 minutes before coming back at 7:35, that's okay. But if you have this on and if you're up for a little bit of learning, I'm happy to offer it. I remember what I did last year on Simchat Torah in these particular circumstances where we were finishing the holiday of Simchat Torah, but we had this little gap of time here. So I remember reading some Rashis and teaching some of Rashi's commentary for the very first Torah portion of the year, for the Torah portion of Bereshit, because lost amidst all of the revelry and celebrating and everything having to do with all the chagim for these past handful of weeks is the fact that we are going back to the beginning of our story. We're going back to the beginning of Bereshit and starting that story over. And I, for my money, if you will, the two Torah portions that are the most fulfilling, in my opinion, are Bereshit and Noach, the very first two Torah portions of the Torah, because it sets everything else up. So it may sound a little strange, because I think if we were to rank our favorite Torah portions, I don't know if that's ever something that you've thought about in terms of what your favorite Torah portions to study are. So maybe it's a little strange that the two Torah portions that are my favorite are the ones that are not about B'nai Yisrael, or they're not about the particular people that God establishes the covenant with. But rather, what we have here is essentially setting up the way that God looks at humanity at all. and the way that we understand the universe and the Jewish place in the universe. For me, that's the most fascinating. So I'd like to take a look at some of what Rashi said once again, and I figure a good place to start. I think we were looking at Rashi's from chapter 1 of Genesis last time. So for this one, I'd like to go to some of the ones in chapter 2. So if you have a Chumash, or really any Bible, I'm going to start talking about chapter 2 of Genesis, verse 15. So if you want to take a look at that in whatever book you're following in. And I want to incorporate some of Rashi's commentary. And as a friendly reminder, when I say Rashi's commentary, many times it's not necessarily Rashi who has a particular opinion. It's that Rashi is the one quoting an opinion, a teaching from something rabbinic or from elsewhere. I think they say that about 9 out of 10 Rashi commentaries are really quoting somebody else. That's not to take away from what Rashi means to what Rashi means to the Jewish world and his place in the Jewish world, because what Rashi did that was so remarkable was anthologize everything, was to basically go verse by verse and to say, all right, do I have anything to say here? Do I have a teaching to quote here? Do I have a particular thing that I need to say or to reflect on? And if he does, he puts it in. If he doesn't, he doesn't. But nobody had done that before, which might seem kind of crazy now, because so many commentators since then have done exactly that. They really took that from Rashi, though. Before, it was essentially different stories about whatever struck people's fancy, but it wasn't in a methodical order. So he made it a methodical thing. So anyway, chapter 2, verse 15. Vayikach Adonai Elohim et ha'adam vayanichehu v'gan eden la'ovda u'shomra. That God took the man, right, basically takes Adam, and places him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to guard it. So Rashi says about this, what he wants to know about is why it says Vayikach. Now, there are other points in the Bible when Vayikach means to take somebody or take something in a physical way, basically to move, to literally take something, take by the hand and move it or whatever it is. But there are other times where taking denotes a certain amount of persuasion. It's not that God's proverbial hand, lifts Adam and from wherever Adam is and transports Adam into the Garden of Eden. It's really that God persuades Adam to go to the Garden of Eden to work the land. Not that there's much convincing that necessarily needs to be done, because, I don't know, if somebody were to tell you, hey, I have an opportunity for you to live in paradise, well, usually we'll take it, right? So this is the emphasis that Rashi wants. The kacho bidvarim na'im, Rashi mentions that God took him with pleasant words, fi tahu likanes, and persuaded him to enter. Now this is, like I said, this is not a Rashi teaching. He didn't invent this interpretation. He took it from Bereshit Rabbah, from a commentary known as Bereshit Rabbah. So that's what Rashi has to say about this particular thing. So, in other words, the first human being enters the Garden of Eden fully aware that he has responsibilities there, but perfectly willingly. So we're going to jump. The next time that Rashi says anything about our text here is verse 18. Vayomer Adonai Elohim lo tov heyota adam levado e'eseh lo ezer kenegdo. That Adonai, God, says, it is not good for the man to be alone. I will make for him a helper alongside him, or depending on how you want to look at it, neged means, could potentially mean something adversarial. You know, a helper against him might be one way to look at it. So Rashi has a teaching from the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer. Shelo yomru shtei rishiyoten. So that people wouldn't say that there are two different authorities. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yachid ba'elyonim ve'ein lo zug, v'zeh yachid b'tachtonim ve'ein lo zug. In other words, who are these two authorities? That the one on high is God, who has no mate, no sort of partner, and that you have now the man, who at this point is the only man and is the one who's supposed to sort of rule over the garden and rule over the other creatures, who also doesn't have a partner. So this is one of those times where God tries to ensure that, yes, humanity is unique compared to the rest of the animals, but humanity, there's still important differences between humanity and God. This is very much God's concern throughout these early handful of chapters of the Torah. God wants to make sure that humanity knows its place. That humanity has special responsibilities, and that humanity is definitely unique among all the creatures that God creates, but humanity cannot be seen as competition toward God's self. So, in other words, here's one way to create a distinction between God and the man. God is not going to have a co-equal partner. So the man has to. Now Rashi quotes another statement from here. And this is from the Talmud. When Rashi talks about Ezer Kenegdo, the helper Kenegdo, either with him or against him, depending on how you understand it. Zacha Ezer, lo zacha Kenegdo lihilachem. If he is fortunate, meaning if the man is fortunate, this partner that God is about to create is a helper. However, if he's not fortunate, then the partner is kenegdo, against him, and they will wage war, essentially. In other words, they will butt heads with each other. So that's why, so what Rashi is trying to understand here is the meaning of Ezer Kenegdo. In other words, Ezer Kenegdo, it's a strange phrase. A helper with him, a helper against him. Why not just say a helper? Right? God, humanity needs a partner. The human needs a partner. Well, because when you have two people together, whether we're talking about a romantic partnership or any other kind of partnership, if things go well, they help each other. If things don't go well, then there's a lot of sadness and destruction potentially. So that's how Rashi understands this phrase, that God understands that by creating another human being, by creating multiple human beings, that it's quite possible that those two human beings, they might be a good combination, they might not be a good combination. I've said in other contexts that to me it's very important that when we look at the relationship between God and humanity, that it's not healthy for us to think of God and humanity as, or God and the children of Israel as lovers. Because there's a lot of poetry that describes God and specifically the Jews as as people who are, who love one another, and who love one another in terms of a human relationship. That's not good, because a good human relationship, again, whether romantic or a friendly one or collegial, whatever it might be, works best when there is a sense of equality, when there's a sense of mutual respect and cooperation. This is not the relationship that God and humanity has, right? God and humanity, they are two different entities, one in which God is clearly the dominant entity. And it's better to understand it as more parent to child, where yes, there is love, yes, there is respect, hopefully, but it's clear who the boss is. A human relationship that is based on one person having a lot more power over another is not a healthy one, certainly not in a romantic relationship. So I much rather would think of God and humanity as parent to child rather than lovers, because that latter description implies that one would dominate over the other, and that's not where we want to be. Okay. So that's plenty about the partnership here. So now let's talk about the next verse here. Vayitzer Adonai Elohim min ha'adama kol chayat hasadeh ve'et kol of hashamayim v'yaveh el ha'adam lirot ma yikra lo v'chol asher yikra lo ha'adam nefesh chaya hu shvo. God formed out of the ground every beast of the field and every bird of the sky and brought them to the man to see what he would call each one, and whatever the man would call to a living soul is its name. So it's interesting, by the way, and this is maybe something that's glossed over, the way we often teach this story is to understand this as, whenever we teach the story of the creation of Eve, we always say God looks at the man and says, oh, well, you know what? He needs a partner. Let's go to Adam's rib and we'll make a partner. But that's not the first thing God does. The first thing God does is to go to the animals. Right? Let's go to the animals. Now, these animals, however, are formed out of the ground after the creation of humanity. So this goes back to an important way to look at the second chapter of the book of Genesis. Essentially, there are two creation stories. There's what you have in Genesis chapter 1 and then the first 3 verses of Genesis chapter 2. This is the one we normally go to, and it makes sense. It's the first one, right, where we have the 7 days, or the 6 days of creation, and then Shabbat. And there it clearly states that animals are created before humanity. It starts with the fish and the birds, and then you get into all the other animals on the 6th day, and only at the end of that do you have humanity. The rabbis understand that humanity, that's the last creature that God creates. In Genesis chapter 2, the first being that God creates, people. So according to chapter 2, when God says, all right, let's look for a helper for humanity, God creates a bunch of animals that hadn't been created yet. It's a very different take on it all. In other words, the original thought was for God to look around and say, all right, let's see if humanity can find a wonderful partnership with the giraffe or with the flea or, you name it, right? Different kinds of animals. Let's see whether that person could be, whether that animal can be a perfect partner for the person. That's God's first strategy. It goes back to what I often say about the journey of God and humanity that's certainly found in these couple of portions and that appears at other times throughout the stories in the Torah and the rest of the Tanakh. It's hard to read those stories and to think that God had one unified plan that got stuck to the entire time. There are plenty of times where God looks at a situation and says, this isn't working. I've got to change gears here. Where God tries things and some things don't take, perhaps in the way that was envisioned. At least when you look at the text. Now, there are plenty of times where you're going to see different rabbinic sources say, oh, well, God knew that this would happen all along. God changes course, but because God knew that the course would have to change. Maybe so, but that's not really proven in the text. Many times what's proven in the text is that God tries something, and sometimes it goes well, and sometimes not really. Or sometimes God is simply experimenting and just seeing what works. All right, so Rashi talking about this idea of getting animals. He wants to focus on the idea of vayitzer, the word for creating. Hiyetzirah hi asiyah, that forming is the same of making. Amurala mala, which had been stated above in the verse, Vayas Elohim et chayat haaretz v'gomer, that God made the beast of the earth, etc. Ele ba'u feirash, but our verse came and explained, Sha'ofot nivra'u, that the birds were created, min harkak, from the mud. Lefi she'amar lamala, since it said above, min hamayim nivra'u, that they were created from the water. V'chanamar, here it says, min ha'adaman nivra'u, that they were created from the dust of the ground. In other words, Rashi is understanding here that these stories, the story of how the animals are created in chapter 1 versus chapter 2, they don't match. Ve'od li medcha kan, and furthermore it has taught you here, shabishat yitziratan, that at the time of their forming, miyad bo vayom, immediately on that day, haviam el ha'adam likrot lahem sham. God brought them to man to name them. Again, this is another inconsistency here. Udivrei Agadah, in the words of the Agadah, Yitzirazo, this instant of the root yatsar is lashon ridui, an expression of domination, vechibush, and subduing.
Kamo ki tatsur el ir, like tatsur in when you will lay siege to a city. She kibashan, for God subdued the beasts and the birds. Tachad yado shel adam, under the hand of man. Okay. So Rashi is quoting again from Bereshit Rabbah and trying to say that when it says that God yatsar, when God created these animals, it's not inconsistent with the account in chapter 1. This is a very common rabbinic strategy. Let's make sure, whenever possible, that the Torah text does not contradict itself. So what our rabbis are doing here, they're saying that, okay, when it says yatsar, in this case, they're not using that word as to say that God created the animals. The animals, as we know from chapter 1, they were already there. So, here in chapter 2, it's not that God created humanity first and then the animals. It's that the animals were already there when God created the human being. It's just that yatsar here is used to say that the animals were essentially subdued and controlled. That's what yatsar means. It doesn't mean to create, it means to control in this particular case. And therefore, chapter 2 and chapter 1 in this case do not have to contradict with one another. Whether or not you want to look at this strategy of commentary as apologetics, or a stretch even, it is notable that when they look, when these commentators, when a lot of these commentators, early ones at least, when they look to the Tanakh and try to figure out what a certain word means, or what a certain phrase means, they're only using what the other things they see in the Tanakh. They're looking at it saying, okay, based on what else we have in the Tanakh, how do we understand this? Sometimes the mental gymnastics are way out there, but sometimes you can see where they're coming from, and I think this is one of those cases. A lot of rich discussions can be followed from this, and certainly I encourage you to look at Rashi and these early commentaries in order to gain a sense of the importance of the text. So, but at this point, now that we're at that time, we're ready to delve into Mariv. We're ready to say the weekday evening service that concludes a holiday. We turn in our Sidurim, our Shabbat Sidurim, we turn to page, thank you, sorry. Page 281, we rise to the beginning of Mariv, 281. Oh, you want to do? Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, sorry. All right, page 281. V'hurachu mechaber avon v'lo yashchid, v'yirbal eshiva po v'lo ya'ir kol chamato Adonai Hoshea hamelech yanenu v'yom korenu. You may be seated. Baruch atah Adonai. El chai v'kayam tamidim lo chalinu le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai amari v'aravim. V'yavad tasir mimenu le'olamim baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael El Melech Ne'eman, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha ve'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha v'lechtecha v'aderech u'shochbecha v'kumecha u'kshartam leota yadecha v'hayu l'totafot b'neinecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha v'ayam. Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem le'Elohim ani Adonai Elohechem emeveh emunah kazam. Middle of 283. Umalchut Tobrat Sam Kiblu Alehem Moshe V'nei Yisrael Lechandu Shira B'simcha Rabba V'yamru Chulam Michamocha Be'elim Adonai Mikamocha Nerabba Kodesh Norati Lodo Sefele Malchut Echaru Vanecha Bokei Yam Lifnei Moshe Ze'elianu V'yamru Adonai Yimloch Le'olam Va'ed V'ne'emar Kifad Adonai Yaakov U'Gielo Miad Chazak Mimenu Baruch Atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael Hashki V'no Alehinu L'Shalom. Ushmort Seitenu Vo'enu L'chaim L'Shalom Me'ata V'yad Olam Baruch Atah Adonai Shomer Amo Yisrael La'ad Baruch Adonai Elohim Elohi Yisrael Shalom. Ki malchut shelcha hi ol omead timloch b'chavod ki en lanu melech ela ata baruch atah Adonai hamelech michodot tamidim loch aleinu le'olam va'ed ve'al kol ma'asav. We rise and recite the Amidah individually, pages 286 through 291. Please remember to include the paragraph to conclude a Yom Tov at the top of 287. We rise for Aleinu on page 297. Aleinu l'shabeach l'adon ha'kol atet gedula liotzer bereshit shelo asanu kagoye ha'aratzon v'lo samanu k'mishachot ha'adama shelo sam chelkenu kahem v'gor aleinu kechol hamonam v'anachnu korim u'mishtachavim u'movdim lifnei melech Malachei HaMalachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I'll get a give it. Kakatu b'Torah Charanayim loch le'olam va'ed v'nemar v'haya Adonai l'melech al kol ha'aretz Bayom ha'hu yihye Adonai echad U'shemo echad. In lieu of Mourner's Kaddish, we'll recite Hakol Yikadal v'Yikadash v'Yishabach v'Yipa'ar v'Yitramam v'Yitnaseh Shmo shel Melech Malchei HaMalachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ba'olamot Shebara Ha'olam Hazeh v'Ha'olam Haba. Rock of eternity, master of all creatures, God of all souls, who sits in the expanses of heaven, your holiness upon the divine throne, may your name be sanctified within us, Adonai our God, and in the eyes of all who have lived. As it is written, the glory of Adonai will be revealed, and all flesh together will see that the mouth of Adonai has spoken. Oseh shalom b'mermav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. And to conclude everything, we say Havdalah, which is much shorter than a typical Shabbat Havdalah, as in we only say the blessing over the wine and the bottom paragraph that notes the conclusion of the special day. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei pri hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamavdil ben kodesh lechol ben or lechoshech ben Yisrael la'amim ein yom hashvi l'sheshet yimei ha'maaseh. Baruch atah Adonai hamavdil ben kodesh lechol. Shavua Tov. Yes, go to Cantor, to the Rabbah.
Will you be on Zoom, most likely in the morning?
Yeah. I'll be on Zoom in the morning.